Welcome back to. We are drawn to stories that explore the precipice, the moments where order shatters and the raw, untamed forces of human nature are unleashed. We dissect the anatomy of power, ambition, and the violence that so often accompanies them. If this is the kind of storytelling that grips you, that makes you question the fragile veneer of our civilized world, then I invite you to subscribe and activate notifications. You won't want to miss a moment of the darkness we're about to explore. Tonight, we journey into the heart of a city on the brink. We will be present at the exact moment a long-held peace is not just broken, but executed in cold blood. This is the story of a single, audacious act of violence in a place of immaculate luxury, and the ensuing storm of chaos and terror that brought an entire city to its knees. The city of Ethelberg was a symphony of contradictions. By day, its glass and steel towers clawed at the sky, reflecting the sanitized ambition of the corporate world. But by night, its true soul emerged in the deep shadows cast between those towers, in the neon-bled alleyways and the exclusive, velvet-roped sanctums where real power was brokered. And there was no sanctum more exclusive, no stage more opulent, than the dining room of La Belle Époque. To dine at La Belle Époque was to announce your arrival. It was a 3-Michelin-star cathedral of cuisine, a hushed temple of wealth where conversations were murmurs and the clinking of Christoffel silverware against porcelain was the only percussion. Tonight, its most revered parishioner was holding court. Marco the Lion Leone sat at his usual table, a corner booth that offered a commanding view of the entire room. At 65, he was a monument of a man, with a mane of silver hair, a custom-tailored Brioni suit that could have paid a year's rent for most of the city's inhabitants, and eyes that held the weary, confident authority of a king who had long since vanquished all his rivals. For 30 years, the Leone family had been the apex predator in Ethelberg's criminal ecosystem. They controlled the docks, the unions, the illicit gambling, and the flow of narcotics with an iron, yet often paternalistic, fist. Marco was old school. He believed in tradition, respect, and a certain code of conduct. Violence was a tool, not a spectacle. Business was to be conducted quietly, away from the prying eyes of the city's elite, many of whom were, in one way or another, in his debt. He was celebrating tonight, a lucrative new shipping contract secured through his usual blend of charm and intimidation. The champagne, a vintage Krug, flowed freely. His 2 best capos and his hot-headed son, Nico, flanked him, laughing at his well-worn anecdotes. He was invincible. He was a lion in his den. The change in the room's atmosphere was subtle at first, a ripple in the placid water. A few conversations faltered. Heads turned towards the grand, arched entrance. The maitre d', a man renowned for his unflappable composure, looked pale, his practiced smile frozen in a rictus of terror. Victor the Wolf Orloff did not enter a room. He conquered it. He was a man forged in a colder, harsher world than Marco's. Lean, severe, and dressed in a perfectly cut black suit that seemed to absorb the light. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly silent. His face was a collection of sharp angles, his eyes the color of a winter sky. He was the new breed, a ghost from the Eastern Bloc who had spent the last decade building a silent, ruthlessly efficient empire in the city's underbelieferkrime, arms dealing, human trafficking. He was a digital-age gangster who saw Marco's traditions as sentimental weakness. He was flanked by 2 men, giants in long coats, their faces as impassive and brutal as granite. The room fell into a complete, suffocating silence. The only sound was the soft, deliberate tread of Orloff's leather shoes on the marble floor as he approached the lion's den. Marco's men tensed, hands instinctively moving to the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. Marco, however, held up a hand, a flicker of annoyance crossing his regal features. This was his sanctuary. Such disrespect was unthinkable. "Victor," Marco said, his voice a low rumble. He did not stand. "You are a long way from your usual, less reputable haunts. And you are not dressed for dinner." Orloff stopped at the edge of the table, his very presence seeming to leach the warmth from the air. He ignored the others, his gaze locked onto Marco's. "I am not here for dinner, Marco," he said, his voice soft, his English precise and accented. I am here to deliver a message. Nico Leone, his face flushed with champagne and arrogance, started to rise. You got a message, you give it to me. Now get the hell out of here before you're thrown out. Orlov's eyes flickered to Nico for a fraction of a second. A look of such profound, dismissive contempt that Nico physically recoiled as if struck. Then his gaze returned to the lion. The old ways are over, Orlov said, his voice still a near whisper, yet it carried across the silent room. The city has evolved. Your time of feasting is done. Marco Leone finally seemed to grasp the sheer, audacious gravity of the situation. He leaned forward, his face hardening. You come into my house, you disrespect my family, my business. You are a rabid dog, Victor, and you have made a fatal mistake. Orlov allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. It did not reach his eyes. You are mistaken, Marco. The fatal mistake was made 30 years ago, when you decided this city was your personal kingdom. A king must always watch for the man who is willing to burn the kingdom down just to sit on the ashes. He reached inside his suit jacket. It was not a fast movement. It was deliberate, theatrical. Marco's men finally drew their weapons, but Orlov's giants were faster, their own pistols appearing with silent, practiced efficiency. The standoff lasted for a heartbeat. The patrons of La Belle Époque were frozen, trapped in a waking nightmare of crystal and silk. But Orlov didn't draw a gun. He produced a single, ornate, silver-plated bullet, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. He placed it gently on the white linen tablecloth, directly in front of Marco. This is for a debt, Orlov said softly. My father, Odessa Docks, 1993. You may not remember the face of the man whose livelihood you destroyed, whose life you ended. But I remember yours. Recognition, followed by a dawning horror, washed over Marco's face. The invincibility drained away, replaced by the ghost of a memory, a piece of brutal business from a lifetime ago. And in that moment of shocked stillness, Orlov moved. With his other hand, he produced a pistol from a concealed holster. It was fitted with a suppressor, but the intimacy of the act rendered the silencer irrelevant. He leaned across the table, pressed the muzzle to Marco Leone's forehead, and pulled the trigger. The sound was a dull, wet cough, but the effect was apocalyptic. The back of Marco's head erupted in a spray of red against the cream-colored leather of the booth. The king was dead. His wine glass, still clutched in his hand, tipped over, its crimson contents spilling across the tablecloth like a second wave of blood. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then chaos erupted. Screams tore through the elegant dining room. Patrons scrambled, overturning tables, shattering glasses. Marco's men, stunned beyond belief, finally opened fire. Orlov's men returned it, their shots precise, controlled, providing cover as Orlov, without a single spot of blood on his black suit, turned and walked back towards the entrance. He didn't run. He moved with the same unhurried, terrifying purpose with which he had entered. By the time the first police sirens began their frantic wail in the distance, Victor Orlov and his men had vanished into the Ethelberg night, leaving behind a dead king, a shattered sanctuary, and a declaration of war written in blood. Detective Eva Rostova was the first detective on the scene. She was a woman who mirrored the city's contradictions, tough, cynical, and weary, but with a core of unyielding integrity. As she stepped into the carnage of La Belle Époque, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and expensive perfume, she knew this was more than a gangland hit. The sheer public audacity of it. It was a coronation. She looked at the body of Marco Leone, a man she had spent a decade trying to put behind bars, now just a bloody tableau in a ruined restaurant. She looked at the terrified faces of the city's most powerful people, their illusion of safety shattered. And she looked out through the bullet-holed, floor-to-ceiling window at the glittering, indifferent lights of Ethelberg. The lion was dead. The wolf was now the apex predator. And the city was about to become their hunting ground. The peace, however corrupt and fragile it had been, was over. The overture had been played. Now, the symphony of violence would begin. The assassination of Marco Leone was not a pebble dropped into the placid pool of Ethelberg's underworld. It was a meteor strike. The immediate aftermath was a shockwave of raw, unadulterated panic. The city's elite, who had witnessed the execution firsthand, fled La Belle Époque in a state of traumatized hysteria, their stories spreading through the highest echelons of power like a virus. The illusion that their wealth could insulate them from the city's brutal realities was shattered. For the first time, the violence had breached the velvet ropes and stained their pristine world. For the rest of Ethelberg, the news broke like a clap of thunder. Whispers in smoky bars and hushed phone calls in the dead of night quickly gave way to bold, sensationalist headlines. The lion was dead. The wolf had killed him. The city held its breath, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. They didn't have to wait long. The Leone crime family, for 3 decades a symbol of stability and ruthless control, was now a wounded beast, lashing out in a frenzy of grief and rage. The mantle of leadership fell to Nico Leone, Marco's only son. Where his father had been a strategist, a man who played the long game, Nico was a creature of pure, volatile emotion. He was fueled by a potent cocktail of grief, cocaine, and a desperate need to prove he was worthy of his father's name. He saw the intricate web of alliances and unspoken rules his father had maintained not as a strength, but as a weakness. His response to his father's murder was not surgical. It was a declaration of total, indiscriminate war. Within 48 hours, the first shots of retaliation were fired. A car bomb, crude but effective, detonated outside the Onyx, a high-end nightclub in the industrial district known to be one of Viktor Orlov's primary money-laundering fronts. The blast shattered windows for 3 blocks and killed 2 of Orlov's mid-level enforcers and, tragically, a young couple who had been walking past at the wrong moment. The civilian casualties crossed a line, one that even Marco Leone had respected. The war was no longer confined to the shadows. Nico's forces, a collection of old guard loyalists and young, reckless street soldiers, launched a series of chaotic attacks. They hit Orlov's warehouses at the docks, engaging in wild, disorganized shootouts with Orlov's disciplined men. They ambushed couriers, burned down businesses they suspected were paying tribute to the wolf. But it was all noise and fury. Nico was fighting a ghost. Viktor Orlov had anticipated this. He had planned for it. He understood that chaos was not a pit, but a ladder. While Nico was throwing tantrums with bullets and bombs, Orlov was making calculated, strategic moves. He had spent years mapping out the Leone Empire's every strength and, more importantly, every weakness. He knew their supply lines, their key personnel, their dirty secrets. His response to the bombing of the Onyx was not another bombing. It was silent, precise, and devastating. He didn't target buildings, he targeted infrastructure. A week after the nightclub explosion, the Leone family's chief accountant, a man named Giorgio Bellini who had been cooking their books for 40 years, was found in his locked, suburban home, dead from what appeared to be a heart attack. There were no signs of forced entry, no marks on the body. But Detective Eva Rostova, looking at the preliminary report, knew a professional, untraceable poison when she saw it. With Bellini gone, the Leone family's vast, complex financial network was suddenly rudderless. Simultaneously, Orlov made his move on the docks, the heart of the Leone Empire. He didn't use force. He used information. He anonymously leaked a comprehensive dossier to the federal authorities detailing decades of extortion, smuggling, and corruption within the Longshoremen's Union, all under the Leone family's control. The ensuing federal investigation completely paralyzed the port. The river of money that had flowed into the Leone coffers for a generation was dammed overnight. The city was now a chessboard, and Orlov was a grandmaster playing against an enraged amateur. The citizens of Ethelberg were the terrified pawns caught in the crossfire. The escalating violence began to bleed into everyday life. Protection rackets, once the sole domain of the Leone family, became a free-for-all. Small business owners were being extorted by both sides, and sometimes by new, opportunistic gangs rising in the power vacuum. The nightly news became a grim tally of firebomb businesses and bodies found in the trunks of cars. A palpable fear settled over the city like a shroud. People stayed home after dark. The vibrant nightlife that had defined Ethelberg dwindled. The city was holding its breath, waiting for the next explosion. For Detective Rostova and her task force, it was like trying to fight a hurricane. They were caught between two warring armies, with immense pressure from the mayor's office to get the situation under control. Their investigation into Marco Leone's murder was a practical impossibility. The witnesses from La Belle Époque were either too scared to talk or had conveniently left the country. Orlov was a phantom, his operations so layered in digital security and corporate fronts that he was legally untouchable. Rostova's frustration was mounting. She was chasing down the symptoms of the war, the shootings, the bombings, while the cause, Viktor Orlov, remained beyond her reach. Her partner, Ben Carter, a younger, more idealistic detective, urged a more direct approach. "Let's just raid his known properties, shake the trees," he'd argue. "And find what, Ben?" Rostova would counter, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Clean offices and well-paid lawyers. Orlov doesn't get his hands dirty. He's a CEO, not a thug. He's running a hostile takeover, and we're treating it like a street fight. We're losing because we're not even playing the same game." Rostova knew the city's underworld intimately. She had grown up in the very neighborhoods the Leone family had controlled. She understood their code, their language. But Orlov was different. He had no code, save for ruthless efficiency. He was a creature of the new, globalized world of crime, and the city's old ways of policing were utterly inept against him. She began to focus on the human cost, hoping to find a crack in Orlov's armor. She visited the family of the young couple killed in the nightclub bombing, their grief a raw, tangible thing in their small apartment. She leaned on her old informants, but they were terrified. The word on the street was that talking about the wolf was a death sentence. One of her most reliable sources, a small-time bookie named Squeaky Pete, was found floating in the river. His tongue cut out a clear and brutal message. As the weeks bled into a month, Nico Leone grew more desperate. His resources were dwindling. His best men were either dead or arrested in the federal crackdown, and his authority was evaporating. His rash attacks had failed. He was a lion in a cage, and the wolf was circling. In a final, desperate act of pride and folly, Nico decided to do what his father never would have. He reached out to the city's other ethnic gangs, the Triads in the east, the Irish mob in the north, offering a grand alliance to destroy Orlov and carve up his empire. Orlov, of course, was one step ahead. He knew the leaders of these gangs were opportunists, not loyalists. He didn't threaten them. He made them a better offer. He promised them stability, a piece of his new, more efficient enterprise, and, most importantly, he showed them how easily and utterly he was dismantling the once invincible Leone family. He was offering them a chance to be on the winning side of history. The meeting Nico arranged was a trap. When he arrived at the neutral ground, a cavernous, abandoned warehouse, he found not his potential allies, but Viktor Orlov, waiting for him in the shadows. Nico's remaining men were cut down in a brutally efficient ambush. Nico himself, however, was left alive. "Your father was a lion," Orlov said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space as he emerged from the darkness. "A powerful, respectable beast. But he forgot that the world changes. He grew comfortable. You are just a cub roaring in the dark. All noise, no substance." Orlov didn't kill him. He did something far worse. He broke him. He calmly detailed how he had turned every one of Nico's allies against him, how he had financially and strategically neutered his entire organization. He took away Nico's hope. He left him alive, a king with no kingdom, a man with no power, a living monument to the wolf's victory. The city, which had been holding its breath, finally exhaled in a collective shudder of fear and resignation. The war was over. The Leone family, the institution that had defined Ethelberg's underworld for a generation, was extinct. The chaos had subsided, but the silence that followed was far more terrifying. It was the silence of absolute control. The wolf had won. The city now belonged to him, and his reign was just beginning. The end of the war did not bring peace to Ethelberg. It brought a chilling, unnerving quiet. The nightly symphony of sirens and gunfire faded, replaced by an orderly, oppressive silence. The chaos had been a means to an end, a brutal and bloody corporate restructuring of the city's entire criminal enterprise. With the Leone family dismantled and Nico left a broken, powerless figurehead, Viktor Orlov's ascendancy was complete. He had not just won. He had erased his competition. The city began to feel the effects of this new order almost immediately. The disparate, opportunistic gangs that had sprung up during the chaos were given a simple choice: join Orlov's new consortium or be eliminated. There were no negotiations. Orlov's enforcers, disciplined and methodical, moved through the city's districts, consolidating power with terrifying efficiency. The old, chaotic ecosystem of crime was replaced by a single, monolithic corporate structure with the wolf as its CEO. For the average citizen, the change was paradoxically subtle and profound. The street-level violence vanished. The nightly news no longer featured grim tallies of gang-related homicides. On the surface, the city seemed safer. But beneath this veneer of tranquility was a darker truth. Orlov's control was absolute and insidious. His empire was built on the silent, digital sins of the modern age: large-scale data theft, sophisticated financial fraud, and a global network of illicit trade that operated in the deep web, far from the reach of traditional policing. He was a virus that had infected the city's mainframe. For Detective Eva Rostova, this new quiet was more maddening than the chaos. She had, in a way, achieved her department's goal. The street war was over. The Leone family, a target of the VPD for 30 years, was no more. But she knew she hadn't won. She had simply been a janitor, cleaning up the mess from a hostile takeover, inadvertently sweeping the path clear for a far more dangerous and intelligent adversary. Her task force was officially disbanded. The war declared over. The murder of Marco Leone remained an open case, but everyone knew it would never be solved. It was filed away, destined to become another one of the city's ghosts. Rostova was left staring at a wall of evidence that pointed to a man she couldn't touch. Orlov had insulated himself perfectly. His name wasn't on any deed, any corporate charter, any bank account that could be tied to illegal activity. He was a ghost in the machine. Her frustration festered. She watched as Orlov began to move in the open, not as a crime boss, but as a legitimate, enigmatic tycoon. He purchased a majority stake in a struggling shipping company, using it as a front to legitimize his control of the docks. He established a high-tech cybersecurity firm, which Rostova knew with sickening certainty was the heart of his global hacking and data theft operations. He even started a charitable foundation, donating millions to the city's arts and culture scene, his name now etched onto plaques in museums and concert halls. He was laundering his reputation along with his money, becoming a part of the very elite whose sanctuary he had so brutally violated. Rostova saw the trap he was setting. By ingratiating himself with the city's legitimate power brokers, he was making himself untouchable. He was becoming too big to fail, too connected to prosecute. The mayor, who had once screamed at Rostova to end the violence, now attended the same charity galas as Viktor Orlov, the two of them smiling for the cameras. Driven by a cold, relentless fury, Rostova refused to let go. She began her own, unsanctioned investigation, working on her own time, delving into the dark corners of the web, trying to find a digital thread that would lead back to Orlov. Her partner, Ben Carter, urged her to be careful. "Eva, this is over," he warned. "You go after him now, you're not just going after a gangster. You're going after one of the most powerful men in the city. He won't send thugs after you. He'll destroy your career, your finances, your life, with a few keystrokes." She knew he was right, but she couldn't stop. She was haunted by the faces of the innocent couple killed in the bombing, by the memory of her informant floating in the river. She felt as though she was the only person left in the city who remembered the blood that had been spilled to pave the way for Orlov's serene, orderly reign. The final confrontation came not in a hail of gunfire, but in the most civilized of settings. Rostova, following a lead, found herself at a fundraiser for the city orchestra. held in the grand, marbled lobby of the Ethelberg Museum of Art. And there he was, across the room, surrounded by politicians and socialites, a glass of champagne in his hand, looking every bit the sophisticated philanthropist. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and their eyes met. A flicker of something amusement, recognition, passed through his cold eyes. Then, to her astonishment, he excused himself from his conversation and began to walk towards her. He stopped a few feet from her, a polite, almost charming smile on his face. The people around them were oblivious, their chatter and laughter a surreal soundtrack to this silent, high-stakes encounter. "Detective Rostova," Orlov said, his voice as calm and soft as it had been in La Belle Époque. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Victor Orlov. I am an admirer of your work. The city owes you a debt of gratitude for your part in resolving the recent unpleasantness." Rostova's hand instinctively went to the butt of her pistol, a useless, anachronistic gesture in this new war. "The unpleasantness you started," she said, her voice low and tight. Orlov's smile didn't waver. "Perspective is everything, detective. The city was a chaotic, inefficient system. I simply streamlined it. I have replaced disorganized, violent crime with structured, profitable enterprise. I have imposed order. Is that not, in the end, what you also seek to do? You're a murderer," she hissed. "And you will not get away with it." He took a small sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving hers. "Get away with it?" he mused. "Detective, look around you. This city. It is mine. I don't need to get away with anything. You are a relic, Detective Rostova. A lioness, perhaps, in a world that is now run by wolves. You still believe you can fight the darkness with a badge and a gun. But the darkness is now on the board of directors. It signs the checks. It owns the servers." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Go home, detective. Enjoy the peace. Enjoy the new, safer Ethelberg I have built. Your war is over. You lost the moment you mistook me for a common criminal like Marco Leone." With a final, polite nod, he turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd of the city's elite, leaving Rostova standing alone, her anger and integrity feeling as useless as ancient artifacts in this gleaming modern museum. She looked around the room, at the smiling faces, the clinking glasses, the veneer of civilization. She had spent her life fighting the monsters in the shadows, only to see the greatest monster of all step into the light and be applauded for it. The chaos and terror that had gripped the city were gone, but they had been replaced by something far more sinister. A cold, calculated, and complete tyranny, hiding in plain sight. As she walked out into the cool night air, she looked up at the glittering skyline of Ethelberg. The fires were out. The war was over. But the city didn't feel safe, felt owned. And the reign of the wolf had only just begun.